All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. Man, great news. If what I'm hearing is true, Gervonta Tank Davis may be fighting Gary Russell Jr. next year at 135 pounds. I am ecstatic about that because that is a great fight for a lot of different reasons. Let's talk about that in this video. Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. Before I get into the meat of the video though, man, please make sure you hit that like button as you come in the video, and if you forget on the way out, hit that like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. Man, I'm excited about this, man, because this is a rumor, this is something that has been said by Leon Muhammad. If you're familiar with Leon Muhammad worked with Bob Arum, worked with Don King. Has been a figure in boxing for a long time. You see his interviews up over on YouTube a lot for boxing conversations, man. Sometimes he hits it on the head, sometimes he doesn't. However, I think that that's usually the case with pretty much everybody, right? So Leon Muhammad says, according to reports that I'm getting, that Gary Russell Jr. and Gervonta Tank Davis are in talks and that those guys should be fighting next year. Now, obviously, there is a fight for Gary Russell Jr. that's going to be coming up, I do believe, in late January, early February against Mark Magsayo, a mandatory fight for him. But after that, this is something that Gary Russell Jr. has been calling for a while. He's been calling out Gervonta Davis for at least 2 years, and he's been saying, look, man, Gervonta Davis needs to fight me because that is a fight that is going to do well in the gates anywhere we go, and it's going to do excellent on pay-per-view, and it's something that I really do agree with. But more importantly than that for me, it is a fight for Gervonta Davis against a guy that is a highly skilled boxer. It is something that is not the same thing that we've seen for Gervonta Davis, if you want to call it the Mayweather method of fighting, which has been, to set up Gervonta Davis with flat-footed fighters that he could easily outbox or that he could beat because he was just so much better a boxer than they are. Like, a lot of people think of Gervonta Davis as somebody that's a come-forward fighter and a knockout artist type of guy, because of what they saw with Leo Santa Cruz and what they've seen with Mario Barrios. But what you saw in the fight with Jose Pedraza when he originally won his title, what you saw in that last fight with Pitbull Cruz, Isak Pitbull Cruz, is that this guy is a world-class boxer, man. The dude he can control the distance very, very well. He goes from offense to defense spectacularly. He's got very, very fast hands, feet. He anticipates well. All of those things are in that repertoire for Gervonta Davis, but we have not, as of yet, seen Gervonta Davis in the ring with somebody that I would call also a boxer puncher, because that's what I think Gary Russell Jr. is. Gary Russell Jr. is another guy that is a boxer puncher. He's a guy similar to Isaac Cruz that is kind of a small dimensions, but he has very fast hands. He's got good pop on his punches. Has excellent footwork, and he is somebody that is going to engage in a fight. He's not somebody that's running around on the back foot, but, very similar in that regard. And I think that a fight, like the actual fight between Gervonta Davis and Gary Russell Jr. is a matchup of two top-level, highly skilled fighters, and that is something we do not see enough of in boxing. Now, also, I'm not going to lie, I'm happy for Gervonta. We'd be very, very happy for Gary Russell Jr. if he gets the fight, because that would be his first really big fight that he's had in his career. He has been at 126 for a very long time. Champions and unification fights have come and gone for him on a regular basis. It's very hard to name any guy that has a belt at 130 pounds right now that is not at 126 with Gary Russell Jr. and for one reason or another did not fight Gary Russell Jr. at 126. And it seems like that trend is continuing, and I believe that's because of how good a fighter Gary Russell Jr. is. And you saw what happened when guys that he has beaten, like Jojo Diaz, what happens when he moves up in weight. Jojo Diaz moved up won a title at 135 pound by beating Tevin Farmer, moved up to 135 pounds, beat Javier Fortuna, and then fought Devin Haney. I believe had pretty much a what level type of fight with Devin Haney that he had with Gary Russell Jr. two weight classes below. So I'm really excited for the fight for Gary Russell Jr. and for the fans in that area of the country, provided that they actually take that fight to Baltimore, or they take that fight. Probably, I would suspect that the most likely place for that fight would be New York. New York City, where that fight again would sell out, man, because Gary Russell Jr. is a very well-known name and respected name in boxing. Also, as far as the going up in weight for Gary Russell fighting Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't really think that. I think that it is something that is doable and fair and still a fair fight, because Gervonta Davis is really not, as far as height and length and all of that, he's not that much bigger than Gary Russell Jr. is. I do believe he's a little bigger than Gary Russell Jr., but I don't think the height advantage is as extreme as it was for, say, like the Isaac Cruz fight. But, Gary Russell Jr. is he's kind of a stocky, smaller guy. Gervonta Davis is a stockier and a guy that's not quite as short, but absolutely terrific matchup in there, man. And I think that is something that should do very well on pay-per-view. Now, one of the things that I wonder is whether or not, what happened with the Isaac Cruz fight may lean Floyd Mayweather and them to say, let's try to get Gervonta in there with an established name, somebody that can really, we believe, can bring a really big fan base to it. Now, obviously, Gervonta Davis and Gary Russell Jr. are both Black American fighters, so their fan bases are probably gonna, intermingle a good bit. But what you have is you have that dynamic between Baltimore and where Gervonta Davis is from, and where Gary Russell Jr. is from, being in DC. And that area alone, you're going to get a lot of pay-per-view buys. You're going to get, and if they have it in that area, you're going to have a lot of people going to that fight because of the rivalry between the two cities, and not just the rivalry, between the two fighters. Now, that may be a little bit hard for people from the United States not to understand, but I understand in the UK that happens as well, where you really do have regional rivalries between cities and fighters that come between cities. I don't think in the United States you really have a city rivalry between two cities in the United States that is bigger really than, or more, and honestly I have to say more deadly really than Washington D.C. and Baltimore. They're only maybe I want to say 45, maybe less than an hour away from each other, right down a highway from each other. They have a shared airport in BWI, right? I do believe BWI is where people fly into Baltimore. They might actually have a Baltimore airline, but it's Baltimore, BWI. That airport, people land into and go to both cities. People travel between the two cities a lot, so that could also bring a lot of names and a lot of money to the fight. But all in all, man, I certainly hope this is true. Would be great news for boxing in 2022. I personally would probably lean towards Gervonta Davis winning the fight because of the age, but do not lunch. Gary Russell Jr. is a very live wire in that fight and an extremely talented fighter. And I do believe that no matter what, it's going to be an exciting fight, because neither one of those guys are going to dance around the ring. Anyway, so that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.